It just ultimately didn't work out for me. From the outside world, it's this bust, it's this guy that's not living up to expectations. But then internally for me, it's like, well, wait a sec. On paper, I did everything I was supposed to do to have success. But the hardest part is just coming to grips with the fact that, hard work doesn't always pay off. And, things don't always go according to plan. And how do you handle the aftermath of that?
All right, we're live, we're rolling. Max, how are you doing today?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me on, man. Good to connect.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks for making the time. I most recently saw that you had a selfie with Snoop Dogg in the broadcaster's box. Talk to me about what that experience was like.
Yeah, man, it was crazy. What a way to cap off my first full broadcasting season calling college football games. But yeah, it was wild. I mean, you got Snoop Dogg. I was calling the Snoop Dogg Bowl that he sponsored in Arizona, and have him in the booth. We had him in like the second and third quarter. And I had seen like the bits and pieces from the Olympics this past summer. So I knew it's kind of like, hey, you got to keep your head on a swivel. Like Snoop could come in with whatever, he could say whatever. And it was a good test for me, man, to get out of like the X's and O's football stuff and chop it up with Snoop live on TV was all time.
That's pretty epic, man. Not many people get that opportunity. Just for some context, some background, give me just a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'm Max Browne, came from Sammamish, Washington. Shout out the Plateau. Living in Santa Monica now, 29. I've been a content creator in various capacities the past 5 or 6 years or so. I took the leap to go full-time down that route in August, coupled with covering football full-time, and played football in college, played football in high school. A big part of my story that people lean into, I've made content on, is I was the number one quarterback in the country coming out of high school. Could have gone anywhere I wanted to in college, and unfortunately the playing side didn't necessarily work out. And I say that not to be negative, but I say that because it kind of established the foundation of my early adult years, and a lot of my 20s has been navigating the career paths and the pivots and whatnot, and finally down a path where, like I said, creating content, covering football full time, and yeah, man, it's been a blessing. Married as well.
Oh, congratulations on that. I was listening to your podcast with your wife recently, and she does a great job as well.
She crushes it. Yeah, no, thanks for saying that.
Yeah, and you guys are in the mecca of content creation down there in Santa Monica, huh?
We're in the mecca of content creation. I don't know when this is going live, but we're in the mecca of the fires too. I guess I shouldn't say the mecca. I'm just south of that, but it's just north. But yeah, man, if you're living in LA, it feels like you got some sort of media adjacent profession these days.
Definitely. So when you search your name online, there's just all these articles of, Max Browne, number one to bust. And it's just this very catchy sort of angle that people, it's easy to be, they call it the Monday morning quarterback, but someone who's not in the game. There's a quote from, I think it's one of the presidents. He says, if you're not in the arena, your opinion's basically not worthless. I'm butchering it, but
I got you. The Teddy, the man in the arena, Teddy Roosevelt. I got it right over there. It's on my wall.
No way. Okay, so you actually know it. So many people have attempted to do great things with their lives. Not many have risen to the level of performing and competing at the highest level, whatever that might be. So maybe just give me sort of like a little bit of the backstory. Obviously, I know it and I've heard it, but just for folks listening, what was that experience like in a nutshell, going, and really I think the thing that I've taken away is that you really stuck with it. You built a foundation, you went to USC, could have gone to any school that you wanted to, but you stuck with it largely because you trusted in your own skills and in your own capabilities. So maybe just give us a little high level on the journey, going, from Gatorade Player of the Year to USC quarterback behind, I believe Sam Darnold was the starting quarterback a couple of years above you. But yeah, I just kind of want to hear it from the horse's mouth here.
No, for sure. Yeah, I always say, my childhood, I lived a fairy tale childhood layout, whether it was friends, family, sports, the whole deal. At 17 years old, went to public school, as you know, obviously, you lived it firsthand, and won state titles with my hometown buddies. And I paint that picture because, I was kind of living the dream that a lot of young athletes, 5, 6, 7 years old, when it's, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's professional athlete in some regard. And that dream for me was alive and well, and not only alive and well, but it was the expectation for me at 17, 18, 19, transitioning from high school to college. You get into college, and I'd like to think I was a hardworking, grounded kid. I wasn't just some arrogant prick that oftentimes people associate with, when you're a big time recruit and whatnot. And even with the hard work, even with showing up, even with all the position battles, had a bunch of coaching changes. To keep a long story short, it just ultimately didn't work out for me. And with that comes the headlines that you're talking about of, from the outside world, it's this bust, it's this guy that's not living up to expectations. But then internally for me, it's like, well, wait a sec. On paper, I did everything I was supposed to do to have success. And honestly, the hardest part with that whole process is, I had a career-ending injury as well. Like, it's not even that, but the hardest part is just coming to grips with the fact that, hard work doesn't always pay off, and, things don't always go according to plan. And how do you handle the aftermath of that, right? Is it looking back and you're constantly bitter towards your sport? You're constantly pointing fingers to other people. It's a constant just negative cloud for the rest of your life. That's the reality for a lot of kids that were in my scenario, where you're the next great thing and you don't come close. Well, then you got another 70, 80 years to live life. And so, yeah, a lot of that's been, especially early on in my 20s, is figuring out who I am outside of just quarterback max, football max, and the transition process that I think every high level athlete goes through, but mine, and guys like me or girls like me, I think it's more difficult when you didn't have that success, and you don't look back on these memories and, have a storybook ending kind of thing. And how do you come to grips with that? And I think it's a challenge for any athlete kind of turning the page.
Other than Tom Brady, I'm not sure. I think that's a universal experience for all athletes. Even if you do have a Hall of Fame career and you go 20 years in the NFL or 15 years in the NBA, at some point you're still a young person when you finish all of that, and the transition to that next chapter. Many athletes do it very well, but I would say the vast majority struggle with that. I saw it with parents retiring, successful people that retire in their 50s and they just don't know what to do with themselves afterwards. So two things I want to say. One is, I have to tell you this. We used to hate when you pitched against us when you played for Puma back in the day.
Throwback, that's right. Dang.
I played on the Lexus team for a year or two, and you guys were our arch rivals. And then we actually, as you know, played basketball together on the same team, Friends of Hoop. So I've definitely been your teammate, and I think just always remember just your positivity, optimism, just very fundamentally sound. I don't think you ever threw a turnover. And
the Friends of Hoop days, dude, I always make the joke that the second I stopped playing AAU basketball is when my dribbling went out the window, and it was like, all right, a 6'5" white guy, we're not doing anything on the hardwood. Let's stick to the gridiron.
Nice. So you talked about finding yourself in your 20s. Like, what were some of the things that you did? Were there external resources, books, podcasts? Was it more of going internal? Like, talk to me about that transition of landing in this place where I'm putting words in your mouth already, but it seems like you've aligned your passion and profession in a really nice way.
Yeah, I mean, a huge resource, and we were just talking about this off air before we started this thing, was Gary Vee. I found Gary Vee in the 2018, 2019 when I was training for the NFL, but kind of being realistic with myself that it was a steep uphill battle. And, Gary and his resources was beneficial in a time when I needed, I think, the blunt, brutal, kind of give me the straight facts, right? Don't sugarcoat it kind of tone. I think I needed that. I had, at that stage for me, again, that's right when I was transitioning maybe away from the game. And it's so easy for, your loved ones around you to be like, oh, Max, well, kind of look at the bright side energy. But then in your heart, that doesn't really resonate because you have, understandably so, a lot of, negative emotions associated with the back end of my playing career. So Gary was a resource, had the pleasure of working for him, which was awesome. But then during that phase, I was very aware that, one of the worst things you can do is kind of sink back into what's comfortable, not be proactive, take the easy job that's kind of sitting right there. And before you know it, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years goes by and life sped up on you in a big way. The difference between your mindset at 23, fresh out of college, versus 27, when some of your peers are married with kids, is completely different. And I'd like to think I knew, hey, that 23, 24, 25 chapter was big, and I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I needed to go out and taste things. I needed to try things. I needed to, explore what those different career paths were, and took a lot of coffee meetings, a lot of phone calls with people across various industries, people that I respected the way that they were living their life. Even if I was like, no, I'm not going to be a, work in sports ops kind of thing. Well, that sports ops person has seen a lot of people like me filter through the program and, get their 2 cents on careers that are out there and where they think my skill set would be placed. And that was very much the story of, again, that chapter from probably 24 to 26 was exploring different career paths, figuring where my skill sets could align, and reaching out, luckily, and was fortunate to have these people in my inner circle to offer insight. And that nets out differently with everyone, but it ultimately got me going down this path, 6-7 years later.
I can concur with that. Having mentors, especially people that are further along in their career and have achieved some level of success, and you can take a slice from them and say, hey, that's the direction I want to go, was huge. What was one thing that you learned while working with Gary and apparently sleeping on the ground? What's the deal with that?
You did your homework. Gary, there's so many lessons. I think the one that really sticks out is he says you got to have micro speed, macro patience. And I think that's a phenomenal way to approach your career and your life. And what he means by that is in the micro, right? In the day to day, in this next, 6-hour window before the weekend hits, having a sense of urgency, getting stuff done. He's big on, hey, how can I turn an hour meeting into 20 minutes kind of thing? And more of just like let's have an urgency, not in a rush, but if you have goals, you have dreams, invest in moving those forward, whatever it looks like. But in the macro, in the whole scale of your life, understanding that, at 23 for me, I might have been a bust, so to speak, but then at 29, you have things working for you, and life's a long game here, full of different chapters. And even if a previous chapter didn't work out, that doesn't necessarily mean that the next chapter is not going to. And having that kind of long-term patience, because especially now with instant gratification and social media and just all the things that come with that, I think it's difficult to do. But then, sleeping on the couch, man. At that time, I was working about minimum wage for Gary, or maybe just above it, whatever New York minimum wage was, and had a summer where I was having a few trips. And when you're young, at that time, had a long distance girlfriend, but I just slept in the lactation room of all spots of our office, a little air mattress, and honestly probably saved myself $12,000 over a summer in New York, not paying rent. And then 6 months later, bought a car about that same price point. So that's the story that I've told myself in my head.
That's epic, man. This podcast, as you can see, I'm wearing the shirt. It's called We Are Satoshi, and it's not just Bitcoin related, but one of the things that you learn when you start to get into investing and planning for the future, whether it's Bitcoin or something else, is just the low time preference. Having, like you said, the micro focus of like, let's drive action today. Don't be complacent, but also knowing that success, like real tangible success, it may not be just visible at the surface from day one. It's actually almost never. So you have to stick with something for a very long period of time. So you went from working with Gary to creating your own content. Was that the next chapter, and also doing commercial real estate?
Yeah. So I think even before I started working for Gary, in addition to his self-help stuff, I always, at least at that stage for me, I felt like I had a marketing brain. I got my master's in marketing from Pitt, and always thought that, candidly, I thought you're working with cool brands. There was a lot of guys wearing like hoodies and t-shirts to work. And I was kind of like, you know what? I feel like I can play in that arena. And so Gary, being a thought leader in the marketing digital space, was someone that I was like, you know what? I think it'd be good to probably work for him. A piece of advice that I got, you talk about the mentor process. I got the degrees and took care of business in school, but still never knew what I wanted to do. But I had a mentor tell me, hey, if you don't know what you want to do with your life, go work for someone that you admire or that you respect. And that's better than just sitting on your couch or doing the random job that then again that's not having micro speed. That's kind of kicking the can down the road mentality. And Gary was that person for me, and I was able to fortunately make that happen on that front.
Did you just shoot him an Instagram message, or how'd you get the job?
I got the job, funny enough. So when I got benched at USC, it's where I played football. The guy that took my spot is Sam Darnold, who obviously right now is taking the NFL by storm. And Sam's a great dude, easy to root for. I've stayed in touch with him. And at the time, Sam had just got drafted by the Jets. Gary Vee's a huge Jets fan. I sent Sam a note and was like, "Hey, dude, turning the page, getting out of playing, getting into the working world. Really love Gary's stuff. Would love the opportunity to work for him. If there's ever a DM or a message or an intro that you could make, I'd greatly appreciate it." One thing led to another. That intro happened. It led to a call with Gary's team. And then, I joined Gary's personal content team, which at that time was probably 30 full-time folks, probably half what we called ourselves channel managers or content managers, and then half creatives. So designers, videographers, the whole deal. And, yeah, man, the amount of investment that Gary has had. I guess you asked me one thing I learned from him to really win on content. The amount of investment, both financially and time and resources, to win. You gotta invest full force.
Was it easy to work for Gary, given the fact that he's so intense with your background in sports? Many people probably couldn't handle that.
It's a good question. Easy makes it sound probably too casual, too easy than it actually was, but it was very synergetic. I guess that's maybe the word that I can use, because I was used to coming off the football field where coaches are yelling at you, and that's the nature of Division I college sports. So Gary's intensity was nothing new to me, and if anything, I appreciated it. I think to get that exposure of how to run a business and to not waste time, not waste resources. Especially having, 3 years later, I went down the more white collar commercial real estate world, where the reality is it is a little bit more fluffy and a little bit more, soft, for lack of a better term. So it was good to get the exposure on both sides.
Very cool. So you started creating content just by going on YouTube and basically breaking down plays and then so I want to transition to talking about your current role and your current path in broadcasting. How did putting in that work on your own channels like open doors or build skills to set you up for the next chapter?
Yeah, so when I was done playing, I knew I was a little bitter towards the game, had some frustration with the game of football, but I knew I wanted to stay around it. I had at the time this vision that I could have a more white collar traditional job and then broadcast on the side. I learned over the next 5 years that to be a great broadcaster, that's a full-time gig, especially as you get older and get more removed from the players that are in it, so to speak. But when I was in that transition phase, a piece of advice that I got honestly across the board from every single person in the sports broadcasting space was, hey, it's 2018. You no longer need a Fox or an ESPN to take a chance on you in a local station to get exposure. You can create your own content. And if you really mean what you say and say you want to be a sports broadcaster, which I have these calls all the time with folks, then you should be in a position where you can open up your phone and give takes and put yourself out there on your own social media. And so that's what I did. That was the time where, for football fans, like Dan Orlovsky's career was just getting off. He was the guy doing breakdowns in his basement with all 22, like the coaches' footage for NFL games, and he's parlayed. Now he's on ESPN every single day during the football season. So I saw that and was like, I can do that mold. I feel like I have the ability and the skill set to talk like that. And oh, by the way, what if I overlaid another level of production value with those videos? Dan's was more kind of off the cuff in his basement. I put some editing resources in there, and that got me off the ground. And then I was able to package those YouTube videos, not to make money on YouTube, but package those videos into getting a reel. And then, funny enough, I played. You'll love this. I played a 6 a.m. New York City YMCA pickup basketball run, and the guy I was running pick and roll with is now my agent to this day. He's a broadcasting agent. Like, one thing led to another. We started talking, and it's a long-winded way of saying the YouTube content was able to package into Reel, which then I was able to sell not only to my agent but other networks, and was able to get my foot in the door with a network called Stadium, and I was a fill-in guy for Sirius XM Radio for their Pac-12 channel when it existed 5 years ago. And just like anything in life, you get your foot in the door, you keep building upon the content that you've made and the work that you're doing, and over the years, kind of trying to level up in 1 degree every single football season's got me in the spot that I'm in right now.
What's a more competitive industry, being a starting college football, Division I college football player, or being a broadcaster?
Oh, baby, that is a great question. I would say funny enough, there's actually less seats when it comes to traditional broadcasting than there are quarterback seats, for lack of a better term. So I would say the opportunities are fewer in the broadcasting side. I would say the intensity that comes with putting a helmet on and being a quarterback, and it being, the widespread love and how much people analyze football. I would say the pressure and the competitiveness is more on the playing side when it's all said and done. But don't get me wrong, the broadcasting and how cutthroat it is with networks dissolving and picking up other networks, and there's always this is the line that I always use is, every year there's another batch of quarterbacks that are retiring looking to get into broadcasting, and there's only so many seats, and it's the game of staying relevant, seeing what value you can bring, but then also being cutting edge and seeing where the puck's going from a content side to get more leverage on your side in terms of your ability to sell yourself to keep that broadcasting seat, so to speak.
In my mind, broadcasting is like the analog precursor to streaming and content online. Like, there was no streaming, but there was broadcasting. Now you can hone these skills, like you said, in your basement or wherever. And I guess my question on that is, what are the skills, or what makes a great broadcaster?
And it's funny you say that too, because I'm in the process right now of trying to build out a longer form YouTube show for a bunch of different strategic reasons. But one, which you just alluded to, is just getting the reps and improving the skill set of being able to talk long form and off the cuff and, build that community. I would say, first and foremost, you obviously got to know your sport, know your subject matter. But I think one thing that I've learned over the past 6 years being in this is, when I first got in, it was like, hey, I'm going to know football better than anyone, and I'm going to teach the viewer kind of thing, and that's going to be my X factor, so to speak. But the reality is, and the more that I get into this business, it's as much about entertaining as it is about teaching. And if anything, people don't want to be talked down to. People don't want to be on their couch saying, hey, this guy's just telling me or trying to show me how smart he is, kind of thing. And so it's a fine line of, you want to be informative, you want to bring the X's and O's, but you want to be a personality that's likable and people can relate to. And, a piece of advice that I got early on in this business was, the person that's watching you on their couch should want to have a beer with you, like that type of energy. And that's always something that I try to keep front of mind, especially as a guy that I can go super technical, X's and O's, borderline formal mode, but I also know I have the personality and the chops to kind of riff with people, and it's the fine line of balancing both those skill sets.
That's super interesting. Yeah, actually, it's funny. I was just walking down the street before this. Big thing I've been trying to do is just get outside, even in the cold winters up here, just get the body moving, get the blood flowing, a little bit of natural light. And I talked to my neighbor, and I was like, hey, I'm talking to Max Browne from Skyline. He the guy that he was just talking to before that's a big high school and college football fan that was also just kind of running around the neighborhood. But he said he was watching I believe it was the Notre Dame game last night. It was the Notre Dame game. And he said his takeaway was that the announcers were clearly biased towards Penn State. They wanted Penn State to win. You could hear it in their voice is what his take was. And I just watched the highlights because actually I was reffing last night. I ref high school basketball. But how do you handle that? How do you handle, if you want one team to win, like how do you handle maybe some bias, or is that something that, it's just part of being a pro, or, being a ref, you're just going to call the game as it is?
Yeah, I think, maybe it's because I played at 2 different schools and, had 5 different head coaches in college. I don't necessarily have the deep rooted bias, so to say, or so to speak. I guess who am I kidding? I'll back the Pac-12. So I guess if there's two teams and one's got a Pac-12 resource, especially now that the conference no longer exists in its true fashion, I'll have some of that bias. But to be honest, that hasn't been a been a huge issue with me. I think the one point I will say on that topic is, if you're going to say, hey, I want to be a content creator, hey, I want to be a broadcaster, hey, I want to put my voice out there, you have to be you have to understand that you are going to get pushback. And if you don't get pushback, I would say the reality is you're not going to rise in this profession. And don't misconstrue that with saying, hey, you just got to be hot take Skip Bayless just to be hot take. But I do think you owe it to your audience and your viewer, especially nowadays. This comment might not have hit as true 8 years ago or so, but nowadays you have to say what's on your heart and on your brain. And you have to know that you're not going to please everybody. Everyone's not going to like your take. But I do think you can do it where everyone will respect your take. I think that's what Colin Cowherd's done really well. And even Stephen A. Smith, hate him or love him. I think everyone can walk into a room, look them dead in the eye, and respect both those guys' craft because of the work they do. And I think they're fair. They're informed and they're fair. And as long as you can walk into the industry with that approach, I think you're gonna be good. But trust me, it took me a long time. Early on, it was, how I'm trying to thread the needle every single time of accounting for every last nuance and maybe hedging for this side of the fan base and hedging for that side of the fan base. But the reality is, I think you got to say what's on your heart and your mind, as long as it's informed and fair, and then live with however the world nets out with that opinion.
That's really well said. And I think that's not just in broadcasting, but in any type of content creation. People have a natural sense of authenticity, is the kind of the bland way of saying it. But when I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's like, why is Joe Rogan the most successful podcaster? It's not because he has so many credentials and he actually actively doesn't cater to the audience. He just talks about what's interesting to him, and people happen to resonate with that. And so, yeah, I think there's an interesting balance to be struck, because the YouTube algorithm is going to push the clickbaity stuff, right? The thumbnail has to be something catchy, blah, blah, blah. But you also have to be true to yourself, and you can't just change. Your opinion is your word is all you have, pretty much, in the content game. So I think that's really well said. I want to ask you a slight change of topic, but still similar. This new transition to the NIL, and how college players are now paid. I was just thinking last night, I was at a Kent Ridge high school game in the packed gym, and I was thinking, these players, they don't even get them new basketballs. Like, all these players are drawing in these fans to this high school, and they're charging a ticket fee at the door. Why are high school players not getting paid? And I guess it's they have to draw the line somewhere, but just talk to me in general about the transition, because I feel like you have a good perspective, playing before the NIL versus now. What are some of the differences? How does the leadership change from a coaching perspective, from a locker room perspective? How does the culture? Yeah, just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I came into college sports, I remember there was the fruits, nuts, and bagels rule. So it was the colleges could give you fruits, nuts, and bagels for breakfast, but anything more was against the rules. And then a decade later, it's one of the top quarterbacks just popped into the portal and is getting $4 million from a booster at the University of Miami to go play quarterback for 1 year, maybe $3 million. So like from that 10 years ago to now, it is completely different. I think I'll start with the positives. I do think, players getting benefited for their name, image, and likeness is long overdue. I think that's part of the country we live in. I think look no further to keep it USC lens. A guy like Reggie Bush, guys that I grew up with, that the school, literally the face of the school and the impact of USC as a whole completely changed forever because of a guy like Reggie Bush, or at least he had a stake in it. Yet he gets in trouble and doesn't have the funds to benefit off of that. And so I do think it's good that players are getting paid. Where the downfall is the NCAA was not proactive with this and pushed back and was rigid and say, no, we're going to stick to amateurism and we're never going to pay players. And that happened long into, call it, the 2010s, 2015, 2016. And then ultimately I believe from a legal standpoint, it was ruled that no, college athletes can make money on their name, image, and likeness, and there was just no guardrails put in place. There's no contracts. There's no like just guardrails. Period. It's basically open season, and players can get funds however they want for the most part. And I think that's the issue right now in college sports is the genie's been ripped out of the bottle. You can't put it back in, but now how do we rein this thing in? And we're going on, I think this is the third full off season of, I would say, the wide scale college sports fans saying this is a disaster, this is a nightmare, we need change. And I don't think we're any closer to getting real substantial change. There's some new laws and legislation coming in with like roster cap and revenue sharing that are going to happen this year that are going to be new. But in terms of like full on change and structure around it, we're not close at all. And that's just the nature of college athletics right now.
That's fascinating. I can only imagine being in the locker room as like the backup, long snapper or something, and you're making $0, and the guy with the locker next to you is bringing home 4 million. Like, I'm sure that, I guess that's a thing that happens at the NFL level as well. But for such a young mind, like even, your brain is still developing. And so I guess it's just I'm just curious, I guess, how that's changed, just like the locker room dynamic.
Yeah. The ripple effect of that's going to be, disastrous. I think my peers that struggled to even utilize their college degree a decade ago when they left USC. Well, nowadays you have guys that are moving schools every year, so you have no sort of consistency with academics and actually building your life. Oh, by the way, you're 18 years old, so we all remember how we all were at 18 years old. And then you're getting, for a lot of these guys, life-changing money. 200 grand, is for a lot of these guys the most money that they've ever even talked about or their families ever even seen. And that is, 200 grand is the price tag for like I would say, established a high level outside linebacker for the University of Washington kind of thing. So it's not like we're talking, this is just only for quarterbacks and only for elite players. So it's big time money. And I worry about 10 years from now, I think the studies are not going to be favorable with, the downside when these guys turn 27 and they've either wasted the money, don't have the financial structure in place, don't have the skills and habits, don't have the grit and the perseverance from, working through a lot of the struggles that come with growth during college. And I'm also aware that at that point, I kind of sound like an old guy and someone who's, 67 years old, kind of talking down to the young guys. But I think it's very much true. And it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate ripple effect that hopefully we can get under wraps. And I think getting contracts and just not allowing the widespread player movement year in and year out will hopefully control that. But you're spot on. To be one guy on a team making $3 million, and then your buddy is making nothing or just, modest money, it's gotta be trippy to say the least.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, there's studies, there's anecdotes just about how many players, like Antoine Walker was one, that he made like $100 million in his career and ended up broke. So if you don't educate yourself and build basic financial literacy and understand personal finances, that money can go quick. You could spend 200 grand at the Porsche dealership down the road in one transaction. Any message for someone, not just tactically, but mentally dealing with that level of opportunity? Also, do they negotiate? Like, is it players negotiating for themselves with the school, or is it kind of case by case?
I would say most of the guys have an agent in some capacity, or at least some, even if it's a family member in their corner that, handles a lot of it. Some of it's slotted, like it's, coaches being like, or, NIL collectives being like, hey, here's the funds that we can get. And then you might kind of sort out how that nets out with a couple different schools and see where that goes. But, in terms of advice for players, I'm always wary of us. I think it's unrealistic to tell I'll keep it through a football lens of a high level football player to be like, hey, plan for your future career when you're in the saddle at 20 years old, thinking about playing the NFL. Football's all you know. I think a little bit it's naive to think that, oh, you know what? when I'm done, whenever that is, that I'm going to get into like insurance brokerage kind of thing. Like that's a little bit naive. I always press the message of, at least just put yourself in a position where you're not burning bridges. You're aware that this is going to come to an end at some point. Like you said, Tom Brady is the only football player in recent memory that's ended his playing career on his own terms. So just a general understanding of this is going to end. I need to have an identity outside of football. Sure, that might not come for the next couple years, but when things do come to an end, hey, I got these people that I can fall back on. I had these relationships with a professor, an advisor, and a coach, or, my friend's parents kind of thing, that when the time comes, I can reach out, and that's a warm contact. For the guys that really get screwed, it's the ones that are naive that this is going to end, are not, they don't represent themselves well. So then when the time does come where they need to reach out for help, people aren't there to either help them, or that's a cold intro. And in my experience, when it's a cold intro and it's someone that you have no relationship with, even if it's a handshake at a banquet, the reality is most athletes, dare I say almost every single one of them, is not going to reach out to that person. But if it's a warm contact and it's someone that, hey, you may have signed an autograph for their kid 3 years ago, and they said, you know what, give me a call when it's time to transition into the real world. When that's a warm intro, man, it's easier to send that email. Man, it's easier to make that phone call. And it's going to be tough, like we talked about, transitioning when you're done playing into the next phase. But if you can have enough of those warm intros and enough of people that'll take 20 minutes to get on the phone with you, I think enough of those phone calls can get you going down a path where you can find a career outside of football. Because the reality is, or after football, I should say, the reality is I have a lot of teammates, a lot of teammates that have a USC degree and are working blue collar, hometown jobs and not utilizing it. And I think it's just as much of an emotional insecurity as it is a kind of lack of knowledge type of deal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And one thing that I often talk about is just how the value of the degree itself has diminished. And ultimately, who you work with, the level of work that you've done, tell me what you've done, right? That's what I want to hear. If someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I want to get into videography. I get a lot of people asking me that, or podcasting. It's like, yeah, just go do the work. Like in Bitcoin, it's called proof of work. So first of all, put in the work. Second of all, surround yourself with people who appreciate that, or, put yourself out there. So anyways, I'm not here to rant. I do want to ask you about sports betting and fantasy football, just because I've seen it rise so much in my 20s. Like, I don't remember sports betting being something that almost everybody, it seems like a lot of people are doing. Do you have any thoughts on just like the entertainment side of football and how the gambling and sports betting stuff has impacted viewership? The reason is because when I watch a football game, it'll show the line for the game, and even sometimes the announcers, the broadcasters, are mentioning, oh hey, USC is favored by 4.5 or 6.5. Like, do you guys think about that stuff? Is that like a concern for you, or is it something that's just natural and it's not really a worry?
I think about it more from a analysis standpoint of, obviously if they're 3-point underdogs versus 6-point underdogs versus 9-point underdogs, it gives you a frame of reference going into the game. But the industry as a whole, I'm naturally a positive, optimistic person. So, I do think it brings a ton of opportunity, especially in my lane. There's a whole, if you were a NFL analyst or a college football analyst, for a while, those were the only two paths in football. Well, now you can legitimately be a betting analyst, which is a third path. And honestly, a big recommendation point when I have calls for people that are aspiring to get into the industry is, making content and covering betting. Like, the reality is it's a huge market. I'm not naive to the concerns. I think, when you have it readily accessible on a mobile app for, especially males under the age of, call it 25, and the long-term problems that come with that, those are definitely concerning. I do think it's net positive, though, opening it up and making it more mainstream and not demonizing the Las Vegases of the world and that culture. I think it is net positive. It obviously comes with drawbacks just like anything else. but there's just so much more investment. I'll never forget I worked with someone in my commercial real estate job who, she was a 38-year-old woman, enjoyed sports, but doesn't really keep up with the daily beat at all. But, was modestly putting, I would say, $100 a week into games, and then turned into a avid NBA fan in the offseason. And I'm sure it happened in the NFL as well. And it was kind of $20 a game. And she, at least on paper, and I trust her, was able to keep it under wraps. And like that fan to me is awesome. That fan is super encouraging to me that like now they're in the fold, the fringe person that's now invested in the Tuesday night game or whatever. That to me is encouraging. I hope there's more cases like that. I don't know the nuances, but obviously there's two sides to it for sure.
Yeah, we were talking earlier just about how hard work is not the only factor in success. And if you study business, you know that there's timing, there's the size of the market, there's also just random luck. I had a conversation with a guy. He started a cheese company. It's called Beecher's Cheese. And he said, yeah, I mean, Beecher's, yeah.
Huge.
Guys from River Island. Yeah. And he said that two of the biggest doors that opened were when he got to go on Oprah and talk about his business, like literally just blew the doors off his business just overnight. So my take is you do the work, you put yourself in a position to be successful. And if it happens, it happens. If not, you keep, at least you're passionate about what you're doing. I am curious, how do you define success? What's your definition of success?
Ooh, success. I mean, where my head goes at initially is finding fulfillment. I mean, I know that your question's broad, so my answer will be broad. But the older I get, I think when I was, 18 to call it 25, so much of it was, hey, go chase happiness, go chase your passion. And as I get older, a little bit of that seems unrealistic or doesn't fully encompass kind of all the nuances that life throws at you. But I think if you can get fulfillment, whether that's in your day-to-day, and that's going to net out differently with everyone. For me, I'm very career-oriented. I'm going to prioritize career over, the Thursday night men league or the Thursday night beers or whatever. And that's a drawback, right? I don't get that, which other people might value. And that's amazing. There's no right or wrong. But I say that in the context of like, for me, I get a lot of fulfillment from the pursuit of my career and investing in the buckets that kind of light up my heart, which might be different buckets than other people. And that's totally fine. So yeah, I think finding fulfillment to me is success, and that's going to net out differently with everyone. It's going to net out differently with you in a different phase of life. For me at 21, fulfillment was throwing touchdowns on the field. At 29, fulfillment is, being a good husband and locking in good broadcasting opportunities.
So I like what you're talking about, fulfillment, because I had the same experience when I was young. It was, just be happy, follow your passions. But as you get older, you start to think about, okay, I want to have a family. What is the purpose of life? Like these questions start to hit you as you go from 25 to 30. I don't know, man. I have priorities, and I try and make sure my actions are aligned with those priorities. I was just journaling last night. It's, number one priority is my health. Number two, family and my girlfriend, hopefully more than girlfriend soon. And then after that is my career. And then after that is, friends, things fun on the side, travel. And it's just as long as you keep those things in order, I think you'll end up being okay. And even to tie it into something you said earlier about it, you can fall into a rut. You can become comfortable. I had a professor in college say there's three types of people: those who love their job. That's great. You love your job. That's awesome. You're aligned. Those who hate their job, that's also good because you need to make a change. But the middle group, the people that kind of like their job, they're just so. They're the ones at risk of waking up at 50 years old and saying, "Where'd the last 25 years just go?" So
I guess that's well said. The term my wife says this all the time, but the people that are like floating sliding, not floating, because floating kind of has a negative connotation. But the ones that are sliding, that kind of just, this promotion happens, that promotion happens, but I don't really like this, or I'm in this relationship and it's cool and comfortable, but I know deep down it's not there. The ones that are sliding, that's the tough part. It only gets tougher as you get older too.
So how do you have the self-awareness because I've struggled with this in the past, and honestly, life has gifted me like the boot at certain times. Like from a previous job, I was sliding a little bit. I'd been there for 3 years. I had learned a lot. It was great at the time, but I knew I needed to make a change. And one day, the company had been acquired. Everybody got fired, and it was like, oh, what a gift! Like I'm now forced out. Like you made the conscious decision to go have a hard conversation with your employer and say, I gotta move on. Like how does self-awareness play a role in making these macro decisions in your life?
Yeah, I think it's self-awareness, and I also think it's taking advantage of the life experiences that I've had. I mean, I would say the biggest benefit of being a bust in that whole experience was, I think my risk tolerance went way up, because for me at 18 and 20, my dream was to be, hey, an NFL quarterback. And if that doesn't happen, like that's my worst nightmare, at least in like my brain and my world. And so I did everything possible to make sure that didn't happen. And so when that exactly happened and I didn't even come close, I kind of got up for air and like was like, wait a sec, my biggest nightmare just happened, and like I'm fine. Like this is shitty, and I got to reinvent myself, and I got to figure out what's next. But at 22, I was like, I'm fine. And the term that I use now is like I had my midlife crisis, or I would imagine some of the emotions that come up at 42 when you have a midlife crisis came up for me at 22, because my football world blew up, which might be, I've obviously never been there, so take that off, of course, with a grain of salt. But a lot of those, like that negative time frame allowed me to say, you know what? I'm going to dive into this, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to switch quickly, because I don't want to do what I did in football, where I spent 6 years building towards this goal only for it to kind of go poof. So there's this urgency that's underneath me. And back to the risk tolerance standpoint, like I feel like going through that football chapter for me taught that, I can get through hard things. I can adjust. If shit hits the fan, I'll pivot and find the next path, kind of thing, which then's allowed me to be more proactive and pursue to a greater urgency with my career that I don't know would have happened if I did not have the pitfalls of my football career.
What's one thing that you wish you learned earlier?
Oh, baby. Commit to TikTok in 2020 when it's smacking me in the face, and not 2 years later, and my career might be in a different spot. But those are the business learnings. I just wish that, back to what I just said, I was really intense as a young athlete, young quarterback at USC, and I look back and I wish I could have lightened up with the whole process. I think I could have had the same work ethic, the same drive. And I wasn't a robot. I always have to qualify that. I wasn't a robot. Like I was still going to like high school parties and college parties and stuff like that, but it was always like so intense. And I wish I could have lightened up, because I look back and, some of my teammates that are still playing to this day were some of the guys that had a carefree energy to them. And I always viewed that as mutually exclusive to working hard, and it's not necessarily the case. And I think I could have benefited as a player, and in my 20s, especially. I stopped playing football. I moved straight to New York and took a minimum wage job and was working 70, 80 hours a week, and it was like I'm gonna grind my way out of this thing. And don't get me wrong, the work ethic's healthy, but I think I could have lightened up a little bit more, and I'd like to think I incorporate that better now at 29, turning 30 in a couple of weeks than I did 5-10 years ago.
That's good advice. I try and the way I talk about it is operate from a place of peace, drive hard and go after things, but at the same time enjoy the process, because your life is short. It's you get to the end, and if it wasn't enjoyable, even success isn't something maybe that you soaked in the moment. Do you think that, and this just came to mind, but do you think that the amount of pressure you put on yourself held you back in any way?
I think it led to the performance anxiety that I had early on as a college player. And I never had that clinically diagnosed. I saw sports psych, and, obviously that industry's gone a long way over the past decade or so. But looking back, I definitely think I had some level of performance anxiety where you want it so bad. And I just never was able to get to a flow state early on at USC where I was just playing football. It was always analyzing and hyper analyzing. And so I do think that mentality held me back as a young quarterback. I'm always careful though, because I do think that mindset has brought me a lot of success as well. I do think it's a big reason for the success that I've had. I just think, revision hindsight's 2020, but there's steps that I probably could have been more proactive to not get it to a point where it was working against me, kind of thing.
So I went to college with Jack Collinsworth. Do you know Jack?
Yeah, from afar, not personally, but of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully I can introduce you two guys, but he seems like someone that it really enjoys it. He's kind of like you, where he's chopping it up. He's bringing this younger energy to this industry that's, all guys in suits standing in front of a big screen and stuff. And I really appreciate that about him. You can sense through somebody on camera just how they feel internally. And so, yeah, man, I'm very bullish on the direction of what you're doing. Describe a little bit about like what your optimal future looks like. Let's say 5 years from now, what's the direction you're moving? How clear is that picture? Just a little bit about like the manifestation side of what you're doing.
I love that question. And I love it because I don't have it's not clear for sure. And I think there's a certain beauty in that I'm excited to not necessarily have this clean cut 5-year plan and see how it unfolds. But I always say the North Star for me, broadcasting wise, is calling games on Saturdays. So had the fortune of doing that 16 times this past year, and that I always want that to be my anchor in the fall. In addition to that, building out the content side of things and having content be a full-on business, which it already is, but now it's on me to scale it. Whether it's partnering with pages, partnering with brands, having a longer form YouTube show get picked up by a network. Like that is the trajectory I see, where it's calling games in the fall, consistently making money as a content creator from a brand deal perspective, but then also building out a more longer form show, both on YouTube and an audio deliverable that is football specific, but then also has either segments or ties that can showcase like my personality and interests and things that light up my heart outside of football, and trying to create that platform and medium as something that I own. I hope that, 5 years from now, that feeding all those buckets is part of my weekly cadence.
Super cool. The podcast that I used to listen to that comes to mind is Pardon My Take. You ever listen to those guys?
I do, not religiously. I see their clips on social media all the time, but yeah, they got a good energy.
They are so good. I'm a little bit away from the sports world now, so I haven't been listening to them as much, but just they're down to earth, just they're hilarious also. They're like almost comedians, but the personality comes through for sure. I want to ask, so you did 16 games this year. Obviously, like, you probably made a mistake or two. Like, were there any moments where you're like, shoot, I said that wrong, or I stuttered, or anything, like any stories that you could tell around just like the behind the scenes of your first 16 games?
Yeah, I have a bad habit of, to me, I say pissed as part of just like normal jargon, and I forget that that's a swear word to some people, or like a borderline frowned upon word. I think damn's another one. Every once in a while you hear a broadcaster say damn on television, and it just kind of rolls off their tongue. And to me, it's not a big issue, but there is certainly a side of the population that, I think damn's a little bit more intense than piss. But I said piss 2 weeks in a row, and I have my boss be like, Max, we gotta stop saying that. I said like, oh, that coach is pissed, kind of thing. And it's the fine line too. If you mentioned Part of My Take, and I think Pat McAfee on one side too, they've pushed the envelope of, hey, let's talk to the viewer like we're just buddies, kind of thing. And that verbiage is what you would say to your buddies. But then at a certain point, it kind of goes too far. So that's one for sure. And then for me as a football analyst, we do have to telestrate plays on the telestrator, which is like when you're seeing yellow lines, that's coming from the analyst. It's not a pre-baked in thing. Yeah. And I would say that is one of the more hard things to learn, and what'll level you up from a good to great analyst is getting that live in rhythm with all the shots and angles and whatnot. And had a couple mishaps there, which is, I actually feel like I'm pretty good at with the telestrator, but that's a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably hard to get reps with that. That's a technology that's probably not cheap, and you also need the live, like different angles. So you're circling things on the screen, saying, "Hey, look at this guy. The receiver makes this move. Quarterback looks what." Just what are some examples of successful use of that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's, the live play happens, then they'll kick it to replay. Like Kirk Herbstreit's great with this. He has even more technology than I have access to. But it's, hey, if you're breaking down what happened on that play and it's because the linebacker moved this way and not that way, a great analyst will circle that linebacker and then maybe draw an arrow. But that sounds simple. But when there's multiple angles and you don't have a second to waste because it's live television, you have to draw that. You have to clear it. You can't have any mishaps. It's got to be clean. And I think the pitfall for a lot of analysts is their brains are. I think this is where Tom Brady struggles. Is his brain's so elite. I think he has a problem condensing that down to just like one punchy take or one punchy. It's just the linebacker rather than the entire picture. And you have to say that in 3 to 5 seconds. I think and while you're drawing, it's a skill for sure.
Just give me a little bit on the long form stuff that you're doing. I'm curious what your plan is with that, what the format might look like, and also just where people can follow that when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm excited. February 1st, launching a long form show. I tried to do it last year and had success for about a month and then just didn't have the resources in place to make it happen. In a better spot this year. It's really kind of the next evolution for my content business, I think, for a bunch of different strategic reasons. I think, YouTube's not going anywhere. So investing and building out that platform strong. In my opinion, the sports fan is conditioned to go to YouTube more and more as the years go on to find their material, right? If 20 years ago it was at lunch, I'm turning on SportsCenter. I think nowadays, especially as Gen Z gets older, it's let me go to YouTube and click on an 8 to 10 minute video of the topic that I know I want to watch. So from a strategic content angle, I think it's important. The personality side that I mentioned before, lean into that and having segments that, I've been a short form guy and it's hard to have your personality, at least in the content that I make, it's hard to have your personality show through. And so in my opinion, creating the systems and processes from a long form standpoint can bring that out of a creator in a better way. So excited to do that. And then you also alluded to this a couple times, but just the skill set of talking on a long form platform, being smooth, having takes, being concise, that skill set and just as a communicator is something I need to build. So for all those reasons, yeah, February 1st, launching a long form show. My YouTube's already up and running. I post YouTube shorts daily. But yeah, Max Browne, it'll be largely football focused with some life stuff overlaid as well.
I know how much work goes into making, especially the short form content. I was consuming a lot of your stuff and it's high quality, very tight edits. Like, do you have a team? Do you do that yourself? What does the back end look like there?
I do. I have a team. I've been working with a social media agency and for years I struggle with consistency as a content creator, and that led to a lot of frustration for me where there'd be months that I was super motivated and, had posts do really well. And then I'd lose one post wouldn't do well after 8-10 hours of work and I'd get discouraged. And it was this constant cycle, honestly, for like 3 years. And I got to a point where candidly, I saw a couple of my peers commit to working with an agency, creating content on a consistent basis. And then their careers took off. And I was like, you know what? I can do that. I need to put my money where my mouth is, somewhat take the jump and bet on myself. And it's a substantial amount. I pay more. This is rather than talking numbers, but just so people know, like I pay more in content than I do in rent a month, which is.
And you live in Santa Monica.
And I live in Santa Monica, which sounds like a lot, but I would also push, and it is, don't get me wrong. But I've also been able to make from brand partnerships on the back end. I've been able to make that up and some. So it's, oh, wow, it's the price tag of, oh, you're spending that much on content? Sure. But then I've had the fortune of, as this has been built out for 18 months, now you're making money off the back of it and it's a full on business. So it's, I always say there's kind of two types of people in my opinion, in the business world. There's the person, would you rather be the person that makes $100,000 a year, just for numbers? I know that's a lot of money, but would you rather make 100 grand a year and have no employees, or would you rather make 150 grand a year but have a 50 grand employee underneath you? The first person might not want the pressure of having to manage another person or the stress that comes with being responsible for someone else. The second person, which is how I'm wired, man, the ability to delegate those tasks to someone else to then pursue other opportunities and build something out. Like, I'll take on the pressure for then the ability to kind of run a business and have the upside and all the opportunity that comes with it. It's two different trains of thought.
That's really wise, man. I like that you think about your content. I mean, obviously as a business, because it's not just like, oh, I'm doing creativity. It's and as passionate as you are, at the end of the day, if it's going to continue sustainably, it needs to be something that is profitable. So it's super cool to kind of get behind the scenes and hear about how things actually operate. So you're able to spend more time going out getting brand deals rather than behind the computer screen doing all the editing and stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah, and pouring into different content pillars and yeah, I mean, I think that's a pitfall for some people. Like, it's natural to loop all content creators into one bucket, but I've learned that everyone's business model is different. Some people are going to have more success on TikTok versus YouTube, brand deals, podcasts. Some people might dive into merch, all that stuff, and it's a topic that's close to home. And a lot of people are intrigued with the business side of content, and there's, to bring this full circle, the sports betting side to the classic influencer on TikTok. There's so many ways to slice this thing up.
What's one of my final questions here is just like, what's the thing that motivates you? Like, what lights the fire inside of you to keep grinding and putting in the work and building?
Yeah, I just think, ever since I was a little kid, I feel like I've always, and I don't say this to be like cocky, but I always felt like, God gave me a certain skill set and a certain level of capability and a lot of tools to live life with. And I just, there's this internal responsibility to pursue life and make the most of those tools, and kind of this whole idea of we're all writing a story, we're all writing our book, and how impactful and how full of impact and material can you make that book. And that's just kind of the mentality of how I've wired my life. And I know a lot of it's been about like career, but even as a husband, a son, a friend, pouring into all those buckets, I'd like to think I try to live life with a and mentality rather than a but mentality. So it's, hey, I can be a commercial real estate broker and a broadcaster, or I can be a great son and husband, rather than in my just observing life, the people that might pigeonhole themselves are the ones that kind of go, I can do this, but I can't do that kind of mentality. And yeah, it's been my mindset as 29 years so far on this earth.
I love it, man. You're like just a wisdom machine. Just like press the button and get a new little bit of wisdom.
I'm trying, man. Maybe that's what I got from Gary Vee a little bit. I'm far from him, but no, thanks for saying that.
No, yeah, I'm being genuine, man. It's been really cool to talk to you. I think one of the through lines in your story and what I've taken away from this is that basically your life is more defined by how you handle adversity than how you handle success. As much as you had incredible success at Skyline, and before that, like, you've now evolved into the person you are because of the way that you handled those challenges and were vulnerable and talked openly about them and all that stuff. So I think, if anything, I want to keep embracing that, and I hope other people do too, because that's where you really find the juice. All right, Max. Well, this has been awesome. What are your channels? Where are the best places to follow you? Is it YouTube?
I'm active on all YouTube, X, Instagram, and Twitter. And TikTok. Excuse me. So wherever your platform of choice is, I'm posting content there. I would say I'm probably the most active on Instagram and TikTok. So maybe start there. But like we were saying, building out the YouTube side. So that's your cup of tea. I'll see you there. And LinkedIn a little bit. Can't forget about LinkedIn, but not as active there.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much for your time, sharing stories, and I hope you have a great rest of the day, man. Keep being you, and until next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. This was fun. Appreciate the questions, man. That was awesome.